He entered the cave only to escape the rain, but found an orc child alone in the dark. What he didn't know was that the cave was hiding something much bigger, and that, on that very same night, someone was already coming after them. 2 years and 10 months. That was how long it had been since the treaty was signed in the city of Iron's End. A sheet of paper with 2 seals and a lie buried in every line. Nobody won. Nobody admitted they lost. The clan men returned to the mountains and the humans returned to their farms, but the smell of blood still clung to the earth like smoke after a fire. In the canyon of green shadows, life went on the way it always had, slowly, suspiciously, with one hand always near a weapon. Traders passed through without stopping. Villages locked their gates before dark. And in the taverns along the frontier roads, men didn't ask each other where they'd been during the war. Some questions had answers nobody wanted to hear out loud. Children grew up hearing stories. Mothers told them about orcs who needed no reason to kill. Shamans told them about humans who respected not even the dead. Both sides had enough true stories to keep the hatred alive for another generation. And the hatred, that at least, had not signed any treaty. It was in this world that Silas Kern lived, or tried to. He was 32 years old and carried more weight than that. His leather coat was worn through at the elbows, the stitching on the right shoulder held together by habit more than thread. The wide-brimmed hat hid his eyes when he didn't want to be read, which was most of the time. At his hip, a 2-barrel pistol and a short knife. On his back, a rifle strapped to the saddle. Not the equipment of a man looking for trouble, but not the equipment of a man who expected to avoid it either. Silas had been on the front line in the last 6 months of the war. He knew what gunpowder smelled like, mixed with the burnt herbs of orc rituals. He knew the sound of a bone breaking at distance, different from close-up, flatter, less personal. He also knew the sound of the silence that followed, when both sides stopped and only the wind still moved, as if the land itself was catching its breath. He had come home to find his village changed in the specific way that places change when the people who gave them meaning are gone. The same houses, the same roads, different faces in the windows. He stayed 3 weeks and left on a morning when nobody was watching. That had been 14 months ago. Since then, no fixed destination. A job here and there, hauling goods, repairing fences, one brief stretch as a night guard at a mining camp near the Iron Ridges. Enough to eat. Enough to keep moving. Not enough to make him feel like any of it mattered particularly. But none of that knowledge was much use to him now. He wasn't a bounty hunter. He wasn't a guard. He was just a man traveling without a fixed destination, carrying marks that didn't show on his skin. That morning, he was following the eastern trail that cut across the foot of the Grey Mountains, a name the locals gave because of the mist that covered the peaks even in summer, a grey so dense it looked like the mountains were exhaling. The trail was narrow. The packed dirt underfoot was damp with dew, and the horse moved slowly, without urgency. The animal's name, if it had one, Silas had never bothered to learn. It was a brown mare with a white patch on the left ear, and the temperament of something that had been through enough not to be easily startled. Silas had no urgency either. He just didn't know that someone had been following him since dawn. The first arrow passed 30 centimeters from Silas's head. He heard the cut through the air before he understood what it was. A thin, sharp sound, like cloth tearing fast. The horse reared, bucked hard, and Silas was already pressing low over the animal's neck, spurs into its flanks, galloping down the trail before he even knew where the shot had come from. 2 more arrows. One buried itself in a trunk to the left with a sound like a fist hitting wood. The other disappeared into the vegetation. He never heard it land. Silas didn't look back. Whoever aims and waits to see the result of the first arrow rarely gets a second chance. He kept his head down and let the horse run. He galloped for 3 minutes, then slowed and listened, breathing through his nose, keeping his mouth closed. Nothing but the wind and his own heartbeat in his chest, too loud, too fast. The sound of a body that remembered it was alive and wanted to stay that way. Mercenaries, probably. There was no other reason for someone to shoot at him without warning on that stretch of road. A grudge would have come with a voice first. Bandits would have called out a demand. This was clean, professional, and silent, the work of men paid to finish something without conversation. But who had hired them, and why? Silas couldn't begin to guess. He had no wealth worth stealing. He had no information worth buying. He had only what he was carrying. 5 days of supplies, a few silver coins, and a war memory he preferred not to use. There were 3 of them. 2 men on foot positioned between the trees, one on horseback further back, watching through a scratched copper spyglass. The man on horseback watched the dust settle on the empty trail, then made a signal with an open palm. Wait. The trail narrowed further ahead. The rain was coming. They could wait. The sky darkened in less than an hour. A heavy, pressing darkness, a loaded cloud pushing the warmth downward. The temperature dropped fast. The first drops fell thick. Then it became a curtain. Silas lost sight of the trail at less than 5 meters. The horse grew nervous, stepping carefully over ground, turning to mud. Pressing on risked the animal stumbling. Stopping in the open risked an arrow the moment the rain let up. He needed shelter. That was when he saw the opening in the hillside. Dark, wide enough to enter with the horse, sheltered by a stone overhang that redirected the rain past the mouth. A cave. Silas hesitated 2 seconds. Caves could hold surprises. But the rain was getting worse, and the mercenaries were somewhere behind him, waiting. He dismounted and went inside. The cave smelled of wet earth and old moss. The sound of the rain became muffled and distant as he moved deeper in. The world outside reduced to a low, continuous hiss. The horse entered reluctantly. Silas tied the reins to a protruding rock, ran a hand down her neck once, and waited for his eyes to adjust. The cave was larger than it looked from the entrance. The ceiling rose about 5 meters, the walls curved outward, and the floor was worn smooth in a way that natural stone wasn't, as if feet had moved across it for a long time. Near the entrance, stacked logs, old but dry. The stack was too neat for coincidence, the wood positioned with cut ends inward to keep moisture out. Someone used this place, regularly, maybe. Silas didn't like that thought, but his hands were already stiff from the cold. He split enough wood and lit a fire with the flint from his coat pocket. The flame grew slowly at first, then committed. Heat expanded outward like something waking up. Silas crouched near it and breathed out slowly. That was when he heard it, not a sound, the opposite. The kind of silence that exists when something is trying not to make a sound. The specific quality of held breath, of careful stillness. He had learned to recognize it on the front line, where that silence often came just before something happened. He didn't turn all at once. He moved his eyes slowly through the periphery. And the flame, grown tall enough to reach the shadows, lit a pair of eyes. Green, large, very still, at floor level. Silas held his position, counted to 3. Then he turned. Sitting on the floor against the cave wall, wrapped in a wool garment far too large for her, sleeves past her hands, hem pooling around her like a small tent, was a child. Light green skin, the color of young leaves. Slightly pointed ears visible above the fabric she'd pulled around her face, looking at him with an expression that wasn't fear. It was assessment. Careful, quiet, patient. The look of something small that had learned to wait and watch before deciding. An orc child. Neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the rain pressed down on everything. Then she pointed at the fire, a small green hand from the enormous sleeve, and said a word he didn't understand. The tone was unmistakable, a child asking permission. Silas moved aside, made space. The child shuffled forward and settled near the warmth. She didn't look at him again. She looked at the fire the way children look at fires, completely, as if nothing else existed. She warmed herself in silence beside a man who, until 2 years ago, had stood on the other side of a war. She must have been about 3 years old. There was something universal in the size of that figure, too small to be alone anywhere, much less inside a cave in the middle of a storm. The garment she wore was made of tightly woven wool with a pattern along the border he recognized as clan work, made with patience, with attention. A mother's work, probably. Someone who cared about the child who would wear it. She was well fed, round cheeks, steady breathing, no signs of struggle. She wasn't lost the way a child running from something is lost. She was lost the way a child who had wandered too far and couldn't find the way back is lost. He'd seen both. She was just waiting. Silas took a thick branch from the fire and used it as a torch. He went deeper into the cave. The walls narrowed, then opened into a second chamber. The air changed. Damp stone, roots, growth. The walls were threaded with moss and thin trailing roots descending through cracks. He ran his hand along one wall and stopped. A breath of air, faint but consistent, not a random draft but something directional. He brought the torch closer, hidden behind thick old creeper, stems, woody and tangled, the kind that takes years to grow like that. There was a gap in the rock, wide enough to pass through sideways. The floor inside was smooth stone, polished in a long, narrow strip. A tunnel, used long enough and often enough to wear the stone underfoot. The warm air from the other side smelled green, living, growing. He looked back at the child near the fire. She had pulled the garment over her knees and was watching the flames with complete absorption. She hadn't wandered in from the forest. She'd come through the tunnel. There was something on the other side. On the other side of the tunnel, the valley always woke to the sound of birds. Jara heard that before opening her eyes. Then the stream, then the wind between the high rock walls. 7 orc women lived in that hidden refuge between mountains, all from different clans, all united by the same fact. The men went to war. None came back. They had found each other by accident and necessity, drawn by rumor and desperation toward the same high trails, and eventually to this place that appeared on no map any human had ever drawn. Jara was the eldest, 38 years old, dark hair with white threads at the temples, a long scar on her left shoulder from a soldier's blade before the treaty. Leader not by election, but because the others looked to her when things needed deciding, and she decided. She was lighting the morning fire when she noticed the flat stone placed each night at the tunnel entrance, a marker, a simple habit that said everyone was accounted for, was moved. Set to one edge by small hands, Jara stood up straight. She looked at the empty sleeping place. She looked at the open tunnel mouth. She called the child's name. The birds kept singing. The stream kept running. No small voice answered. And from the other side of the tunnel, less than 50 meters away through solid rock, there was a light, orange and steady, a fire that hadn't been there when she'd closed her eyes. Jara didn't shout, didn't run. That was what distinguished her. In a moment of danger she became quieter, not louder. Her voice dropped, her movement slowed and became deliberate. Her thinking narrowed to what was necessary. In less than 3 minutes, all 7 were awake. In less than 5, all were armed and positioned at the tunnel entrance, bows, knives, a short spear. None needed more than what Jara said in 2 words: the child. They moved through the tunnel in single file, no torches. They knew it well enough to move in near darkness, and light would announce them before they could see anything. Jara kept one hand on the wall and moved quickly, the orange glow growing as they approached. He was sitting near the fire with the child settled in his lap. She had moved there herself, sometime in the last hour, with the confidence of a small person who had decided a thing, when he heard footsteps. Multiple, fast, coordinated, coming from the back of the cave. Silas set the child on her feet and was standing with the pistol in hand before the first of them came through. 7 orcs, armed, fanning out with the practiced spacing of people who had done this before, eyes bright in the firelight, reading everything at once. The one in the middle was taller than the others, dark hair pulled back, a scar visible at the shoulder where her coat had shifted. She looked at him with an expression Silas recognized from the front lines. Not rage, something more controlled, the look of someone who had already decided and was now executing it. "Stop, now!" Low voice, no waver in it at all. Silas stopped. He raised his free hand slowly, palm out. The hand with the pistol stayed at his side, not aimed at anyone, but present. The child looked at the women, then at Silas, then back at the women, and said something short in their language. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. The tall one's face shifted half a degree, a calculation changing. "What did she say?" Silas kept his voice even. "I asked if she was all right." A pause. "She said she is." The rain pushed at the cave mouth, the fire crackled. Nobody moved. "I found her at the entrance when I came in," Silas said slowly, no gestures. "She was alone. I made a fire so she wouldn't freeze. I'm being hunted by hired men, and I needed shelter. That's all of it." The tall one looked at him for a long time. She looked at the child, at the fire, the horse, the gear still strapped to the saddle. She was reading the scene the way a tracker reads ground, looking for what was missing as much as what was there. Then she tilted her head toward the others. They didn't lower their weapons, but they stepped back half a pace. "Sit," she said. "You're going to tell me who is hunting you." Jara listened without interrupting. She sat across the fire with the child back in her lap. The girl had climbed up as soon as the weapons lowered, apparently considering the crisis resolved, and listened with the focused stillness of someone storing every detail. Unidentified mercenaries, no warning, no demand, unknown motive, no known enemies. When Silas finished, she was quiet. "Did you recognize any of them?" "Didn't see faces. Only heard the horses and saw the arrows." She nodded once, filed it. When the rain eased, Silas remembered the horse, still tied near the entrance, head low, breathing steam into the cold air. He had been so focused on the fire, then the confrontation, that he'd left her standing in the damp. He stood. "My horse," he said, not quite asking, not quite explaining. Jara said nothing. She watched. He walked out, untied the reins, brought the mare deeper into the cave away from the draft. He removed the saddle, set it against the wall, then went back to the fire and found a dry cloth in his pack to run over her coat. He worked methodically, neck to flank, the way a person works when they're not thinking about being watched. One of the other women said something to Jara in a low voice. "She said a man who thinks of his animal before himself tends to be trustworthy," Jara translated. The tone sat exactly between neutral and something warmer. Silas didn't respond. He folded the cloth and set it down. The next morning arrived clear and cold. Jara came to him before the others were fully awake. "Come," she said. "Jara." She watched him as they moved through the tunnel, how he ducked when the ceiling dropped without breaking stride, how he ran his fingertips along the wall, reading the stone, how he listened. She had known men who filled silence with noise because silence made them nervous. He was not one of those. The tunnel opened. The valley received them all at once. One moment stone on all sides, the next green, alive. Water moving over rocks in the early light, birds calling from the heights of the surrounding mountains, the smell of wet vegetation and cold air, and something untouched by smoke. A place enclosed on every side, invisible from the outside world. Silas stopped at the tunnel's mouth and stood very still. She gave him the time. "No one knows this exists," he said finally. Not a question, the tone of someone confirming. "No one except us." He turned to her. "And you're showing me." Not an accusation, something harder to answer than that. She looked at the valley, at the others going about their morning, at the cook fire's first smoke, at the mountains holding everything enclosed and secret. "You kept the child from the cold," she said. "You'll stay until the men following you are gone." She paused. "But if you use this place against us, If this location ever leaves your knowledge for any reason, you'll need far more than 2 weapons to get out." Silas looked at her for a moment, then nodded once, short, direct, no decoration. It was exactly the kind of answer she could work with. The days passed in a way Silas hadn't experienced in a long time, with rhythm. Mornings he helped carry water from the stream, 2 clay vessels at a time, making the trip twice before the others finished preparing the meal. Simple work, the kind that fills the hands without filling the head. And he found he didn't mind it. Midday, he went hunting with Vesha, who moved through the forest with a silence that made him feel loud by comparison, and a younger one he called Rue, because he couldn't wrap his tongue around the full name on the first 3 attempts. And she accepted the shortened version without complaint and without making it a thing. In the afternoons, he repaired what needed repairing. A wooden beam serving as the main support for the food stores had developed a crack that would split by winter. A piece of leather was giving out on a bowstrap in a way that would fail at exactly the wrong moment. He worked without being asked, which seemed to count for something. The child's name was Mira. She decided he was trustworthy on the second afternoon, when he reached a fruit off a high branch she'd been working at in intervals. Each attempt slightly different, each one falling short. He walked over, reached up, handed it to her. She looked at it, then at him, then went and sat down and ate it without a glance back. After that she followed him, not constantly, not obviously, but consistently, appearing at his side when there was nothing particular happening, settling near him when there was a fire going. When he lit the evening fire, she would watch the flames with the same absorption she'd shown that first night. The suspicion of the others shifted gradually. Not gone. It would never be fully gone, and he didn't expect it to be. But the quality changed. Less vigilance, more ordinary attention. He didn't push it. He showed up, did the work, said what needed saying, and left the rest alone. Outside the valley, Dorak found the tracks on the afternoon of the 5th day. The boot prints were gone, washed out, but the mud at the cave entrance had dried with a texture that didn't match the ground around it. The pressed pattern of a large, loaded horse that had moved in and out more than once. Dorak crouched and read it carefully, then went inside. The fire had been properly put out, but the spread of the ash ring told him someone had stayed multiple nights. He went deeper, running his hand along the wall the way he always did in unfamiliar caves, following the irregularities. He felt it, a thin, consistent current of air against his palm from a specific point in the rock. He moved the creeper aside, the tunnel, worn floor, inward draft, open space on the other side. The floor had been used many times over a long period. He walked back to the entrance without hurrying. The other 2 were waiting by the horses. "Found it," Dorak said. He looked at the man who led them. "They're inside." They had left before dawn, Silas, Vesha, and Rue, with bows and the empty carry bags. The valley's stores had run low faster than expected. 7 people, and now effectively 8, eating through what the land provided. They needed a substantial hunt. By afternoon, they had 2 clean kills. They were coming back through the lower trail when Silas stopped. 3 horses, tied near the cave entrance. Well-kept animals with mercenary saddles, the configuration he recognized, designed for a man who needed his rifle accessible in under 2 seconds. No guard outside. All 3 had gone in. He lowered the carry bag carefully to the ground. He thought for 10 seconds. The tunnel, the cave, the valley, where they would be positioned, how long they'd had. "The horses first," he said quietly. "Without them, they have no exit." In the valley, minutes earlier, Jara had heard something wrong in the silence. Not a sound. The specific absence that happens when the birds in one part of the valley stop calling at once. She had 2 seconds to process it. The men were already through the tunnel, 3 of them moving fast, pistols drawn. She was 3 steps from her bow. She took 1 step toward it. Don't. Flat, final. In less than 2 minutes, all 4 orcs in the valley were bound, wrists behind them, with rope the men had brought specifically for this. They had planned it, had known roughly how many to expect. They'd had time to watch and count. Mira. Jara found her with her eyes immediately. The child was by the cook fire. Jara caught her eye and gave one sharp motion with her chin, a signal they had practiced. Mira slipped behind the large flat rock at the fire's edge without a sound. The mercenaries talked among themselves with the easy tone of men who considered the hard part finished. They discussed what they were owed, what the orcs would fetch, the human bounty on top. They were calculating their futures. They paid no attention to the horses outside. Jara knelt, hands bound, and made herself breathe evenly. She listened for the birds. They would come back when whatever had frightened them passed. Silas. They drove the mercenary horses off with shouts and claps. The animals bolted into the tree line without looking back. Gone. Silas went first through the tunnel, pistol in one hand, short sword in the other. In close quarters, a rifle was more liability than asset. Vesha and Rue moved behind him, bows drawn. He came out into the valley and saw it all in the single second before anyone moved. 4 women bound on the ground, 3 mercenaries standing among them, the cook fire still burning, the flat rock where Mira was hidden. 2 of the mercenaries turned at the sound of his emergence. He shot the nearest one before the man finished turning. The second raised his rifle, a fraction too slow, and Rue's arrow caught him in the upper arm, spinning him sideways. The rifle dropped. He went down hard. The third closed on Jara in 2 fast steps, knife at her side, using her body as a shield. "Back, or she bleeds." Silas stopped. He looked at Jara. She was on her knees, bound, knife against her ribs, not looking at the knife, looking at him, the calm of someone thinking, not surrendering. He saw the shift in her shoulders, the small gathering of tension. She drove her elbow back into the man's stomach, hard, short, from a position that shouldn't have had that much force in it. He doubled, his grip on the knife broke. Silas moved in. 3 seconds, 3 men down. Then the third, winded on the ground, half-conscious, fired his pistol in a reflex contraction as Silas stepped back. Wild shot, angled upward, aimed at nothing. It hit Silas in the left abdomen. He heard it before he felt it. A flat crack, close, then impact, not burning, more like something pushed hard out of the way. He looked down, put his hand to the place. He stood 2 more seconds on momentum. Then his knees gave out. Jara's bound hands caught his shoulder before he hit the stone. The 3 mercenaries lay where they were, wounded, horseless, disarmed, conscious enough to understand they had lost. Vesha cut Jara free. Jara looked at the 3 men with a long, level look. "Go," she said. "Walk out of the tunnel. Don't come back." The leader started to say something. "Walk," she said again. Quiet. It didn't need to be anything more than that. They went, on foot, injured, no horses, no supplies, into the forest between the grey mountains and the nearest settlement. 4 days of walking in good health. They would not cover it in good health. Jara had said nothing about mercy. The distance had already decided their fate. She turned back to Silas. He was on the ground, hand pressed to his side, looking up at the sky with the expression of a man working hard not to show how bad it is. "How bad?" she said. "Could be worse," he said. She pressed her hand over his, already too warm. "We'll see," she said. The fever came on the 2nd day. The bullet had gone through, entered on the left, exited through the side, no metal left inside. But the path it had taken was not clean, and by the 2nd morning the heat coming off him was unmistakable. Jara worked with what she had. Roots boiled dark for fever. Poultices of specific leaves changed every few hours. She kept him hydrated when he could swallow, still when he couldn't, the wound covered and clean. They took turns through the nights, 2 hours on, 2 resting, rotating without discussion, everyone knowing the schedule. When the fever peaked, one of them sat with him and held his hand. Not comfort, exactly. Anchor. Something for a feverish body to hold to when the mind was somewhere else. Mira wouldn't go far. She kept him in her sight throughout the days, circling back between other activities. She dragged her wool garment to a spot near enough to watch his breathing and sat there through the evenings, patient in the way 3-year-olds usually aren't. On the 5th day, the fever reached its worst. Jara sat with him through the whole night, changed the poultice 3 times, listened to his breathing, the rhythm, whether it was deepening or thinning. She had tended dying men before. She was trying to understand which kind of night this was. Somewhere before first light, she found herself holding his hand without remembering taking it. She didn't put it down. She didn't have a clear name for what she felt. It had crossed some line during the days of watching him fight something invisible, become something more specific than the care of a healer. The particular worry you feel for someone you've started to include in your count of the things that matter. She didn't examine it closely. There was no time for that. On the morning of the 14th day, the fever broke. She was asleep for the first time in 3 days when she heard the change in his breathing. She was awake before she was fully conscious, already looking at him. His eyes were open, skin still pale from the long illness. But the eyes were clear, present, looking at the familiar sky between the valley walls with the simple recognition of someone who knows where they are. Silas, he recognized the sky. Stone walls, blue between them, birds, the usual birds. He lay still a moment, took stock. Pain on the left side, considerable but stable. Weakness through his whole body, dry mouth, his hand in someone's hand. He turned his head. Jara was beside him, watching him with an expression that had several things in it and showed none of them fully. He tried to sit up. Her hand came down on his shoulder. Firm. 2 more days, she said. He relaxed back. He was, honestly, grateful for the instruction. 2 more days, then 2 more after that before she let him walk to the stream alone, then another week of being redirected back to the mat whenever she decided he was pushing it. He complied without argument. He was not by nature a man who held still, but there was something about her particular form of authority that made argument feel like the wrong tool. 15 days after the bullet, he walked to the center of the valley by himself. Mira came from across the valley at a run, the committed, tottering run of a small child going full speed, and grabbed his hand with both of hers when she reached him. She didn't say anything, just held on, looking up at him with complete satisfaction, as if something that had been wrong was now correct. He stood there with her small hands wrapped around one of his and looked out over the valley. The green of it, the water, the completeness of a place the world didn't know existed. He didn't let go of her hands. The conversation with Jara happened 3 days later, sitting on the flat rocks by the stream in the long afternoon light. They had talked over the days of his recovery, pieces of conversation assembled gradually, no rush, no performance. He knew about her clan now, the years before the war, what the silence after the treaty had meant to someone who'd been waiting in it. She knew about his village, the 14 months of moving without direction, what a man carries when he has nowhere to put it down. "Stay," she said, simple, 1 word. Silas looked at the valley, at the green held between the grey mountains, at Vesha and Rue near the food stores, at the place that appeared on no map. "A human living hidden with all of you," he said, saying it out loud to hear how it sounded. "A man who knows how to hunt, fix things and doesn't talk more than necessary," she said. "Those are harder to find than you'd think." He was quiet for a moment, then he looked at her. She met it directly, the way she met everything. "All right," he said, and he stayed. What grew between them was slow and had no particular beginning. Gestures before words, the silence of 2 people comfortable enough not to fill it, hands that found each other one evening without either of them making a decision about it. She was strong in exactly the places where he had come undone. He made her laugh with bad jokes that both of them knew were bad, and the fact that he delivered them anyway, that she understood that, was its own kind of language. They didn't make promises out loud. They kept being there day after day until being there was the promise. 2 years later, in the valley that appeared on no map, 2 children ran among the rocks and the low vegetation. Mira, 5 years old now, chasing a smaller child across the open ground, a child with beige skin marked with patches of green on the arm, the neck, at the curve of the pointed ears. Half orc, half human, entirely here, entirely theirs, entirely unaware of what the world outside those mountains thought about such a thing existing. Nearby, on the flat rocks by the stream, Silas and Jara sat in the particular silence of people who have nothing left to prove to each other. Around them the others, Vesha, Rue and the rest, went about the ordinary work of the afternoon, cook fire, mending. The small, continuous business of a life made from scratch in a place the world had overlooked. The sun moved behind the western wall of the mountains. The light in the valley shifted. Orange first, spreading across the high rocks, then gold, then the soft grey of evening coming in quietly from the east. Mira stopped running. She turned to the two adults on the rocks and extended both arms, the gesture she had invented herself somewhere in the last year. A small, beckoning wave with both hands that meant, "Come here, come now, I want everyone together." Silas and Jara rose from the rocks. They walked toward her. In a world that had never managed to make peace, they had built their own, quietly, without permission, in a valley no one knew existed. It was enough. It was more than enough. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-bound legacy.